Lately there's been lots of discussion about fat over lean. Let's put that one to rest. The difference between fat and lean in reference to oil painting is between this and this. When we say fat over lean, we're referring to how much oil is in the paint versus how much solvent is in the paint. So let's clear up a few things before we start. One, oil paint does not dry by evaporation like water does. All water mediums dry by evaporation, but oil paint dries by oxidation. So what that means is that the surface of the oil might feel dry, but underneath it is still going to be wet, and that's fat, the oil that's underneath. And it will take that for sometimes it will take that up to a year to actually get dry. So the principle of fat over lean, it developed many years ago, in fact centuries ago, when the oil techniques had to do with building layers of oil paint rather than alla prima. Now the difference between that is alla prima means all at once, all in one sitting, where you're not building layers, but you're applying all the paint kind of in equal spots on the canvas. But when you're building layers, the fat over lean principle becomes important, because if the paint that has the most oil in it is underneath and the paint with the less oil is on top, there will be cracking, and sometimes that oil that's on top can just be wiped off. So what we mean now about the amount of solvent or the amount of oil. First, you need to know the difference between the two. And according to some of the discussions I've seen on our comments, a lot of you don't know the difference between solvent and medium. Now, a solvent is just that. It's a material that dissolves the oil, such as Gamsol. There's also Permalba. Any kind of mineral spirits or derivative of mineral spirits or turpentine, those are all solvents. Those are going to weaken the oil. And in the water-based, yes, there is such a thing as water-soluble oils. They have also something called a thinner that is the same thing. So if you add a solvent to the oil, you weaken it, you make it leaner. So here's the difference in how it looks. As the oil comes straight out of the tube like this, that's fat. That means that it has a lot of oil in comparison to the amount of pigment that's in it. If you add linseed oil to that, you make it fatter. However, if you add a solvent to it, and I'm going to do that right here, you see what happens there when we add the solvent. The solvent in this case is Gamsol. So when we add the solvent, it dilutes that oil and it makes it weaker, therefore leaner. And this is what that looks like. Now, if you're an oil painter who likes to put a layer of paint on your canvas, or you like to tone the canvas before you begin painting, most likely you're going to tone it with the lean that will have the solvent in it. But if you're the kind of painter that wants to go straight forward and you don't use any mediums at all, then you're painting with all fat. That means with no solvent. There is one other little element there, and that is, what about mediums that have a drying element in them? We have two major mediums that are made primarily for enabling quick drying. One of those is made by Winsor Newton called Liquid, and another is made by the Gamlin company called Galkid. Those two affect the oxidation and enable the whole layer to get drier quicker. So they don't figure into the fat over lean because of the chemical reaction that these two cause in the paint itself. They don't fit into the fat over lean. So when you're concerned about fat over lean, if you don't use solvents, you don't have anything to worry about. If you're an alla prima painter, where you're painting with a paint straight out of the tube, you're not adding any mediums to it, you don't have to worry about that at all. Remember, the only reason for the fat over lean principle is that when you're putting the lean on first, that means the paint that has the solvent in it, and then you put the fat on top of that, as the lean is going to be dry before the fat goes on it, because all the solvent will evaporate and you won't get cracking. However, if you do it the other way around, if you put the fat on first, and then if you put a leaner layer on top of that, that means a layer that has more solvent, the chances are your paint is going to crack, because the solvent part will evaporate and dry before the fatter part does, and so it's going to cause a little tension there between the two, and that will cause the painting to dry, the painting to crack. And there's another thing too. If you put lean paint on top of fat paint, now that I've explained that, you know what I'm talking about. Once it appears to be dry, you'll be able to scrape that paint away even with your fingernails. So any kind of cleaning, that's gone. That means if you sign your paintings when you sign your paintings after they are already dry, you don't want to just add a little bit of solvent to the paint to thin it enough so that you can sign it. You always want to add some medium to the paint. Something as linseed oil or liquid will work just fine to thin that paint so that you can sign it without having to worry about your signature disappearing someday. So that's the scoop on fat over lean. I hope that made it clear for you. And if it did, if you have other problems that you'd like for me to discuss, leave a comment right down here and we'll take a look at it on our quick tips. And don't forget, we've got our tutorial videos on DianneMize.com. Lots and lots of things explored there. So take a look. And there's your quick tip.